Well, Taylor, what happens when you get two future SEC opponents, some big running backs, and a lot of snow?
You get one heck of a football game, probably.
You get a lot of excitement. We're going to have a lot of fun diving into the 2000 Independence Bowl on our first ever episode of Game of Storms. That's next here on the X Sports Network.
This is the X Sports Network.
Well, welcome everybody to our first ever episode of Game of Storms. It's a passion for both myself, Taylor Plott here. I'm AJ Good here. I've always loved the effect that weather can have on the games. You know, you're more of a weather guy than a sports guy. I'm more of a sports guy than a weather guy. But man, Taylor, we love when they two collide at the same time.
Oh, exactly, because you can get wacky outcomes. It can just literally 1 second the field is nice and green, the next second it is, holy cow, you've got a foot of snow on the ground. It could wreak havoc, but it makes for some good sporting events.
I can't tell you, Taylor, how excited I am for this. I've always wanted to do a series that collides weather and sports together because, you know, basketball and hockey, they really don't collide all that often, except for, you know, one of our future episodes. We're not going to get too deep into a tornado going into the Georgia Dome, but that's a little bit of a segue. But I've always wanted to do something like this because, you know, it's just so much fun to see what weather can do to an outdoor game.
Yeah, exactly. And like we mentioned, it's like you could start the game off completely fine. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, boom, Mother Nature just takes on over, and you're trying to not only adjust to the opponent, but you're having to adjust to the weather as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's dive into it, man. This is one of the funnest games. I remember watching it. It's the year 2000, December 31st, New Year's Eve. Independence Bowl isn't on New Year's Eve anymore, but back in the day, this is actually one of the bigger bowl games because you had a 7-4 SEC team in Mississippi State and a 7-4 Big 12 team in Texas A&M. It's crazy how just 25 years ago, this was a Big 12 SEC game.
Exactly, and it's just one of those, like you mentioned, Independence Bowl. This used to be one of the top tier bowls. I mean, if you really look at it from today's perspective, it could consider, you know, a New Year's Six type of bowl, if you will, back in the day. So, I mean, really good opponents here with Big 12 SEC matchup. And not only that, they had some really good teams, really good players on those teams.
They really did. Well, let's take a look at both sides. Texas A&M, starting first with them, came in at 7-4 overall and was ranked for 4 weeks during the season. Taylor went 1-3 during that time. That one win, though, pretty big one. Knocked off 10th ranked Kansas State 26-10. Their head coach was R.C. Slocum. Spent 14 years with the Aggies, went 123, 47-2 at 4 10-plus win seasons. However, made 11 bowl games, went 3-8 during that time.
Yeah. And even with a powerhouse like A&M, I mean, you do that and your job security gets a little wonky.
Yes, but that's one thing. You know, they've had so many coaching changes throughout the years. Yeah. And everyone says, well, they have all this money and all this stuff. They still haven't won a national championship since, what, the 30s? I mean, I haven't looked it up in a while, but, you know, everyone thinks they're this powerhouse, and they've kind of just been this kind of team for a long time.
They haven't been a bad program. They're a kind of towards, I wouldn't say top, but obviously towards the upper end of program standards, but really and truly, you're right. It's just they've had really good teams. They've had great potential, but they always end up with like 7-4, 8-3 type of seasons.
Yeah, when you look at offensively, they're led by quarterback Mark Ferris, 2,551 total yards, 10 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, completed just a hair below 59.9% of his passes. They didn't have a running back over 455 yards rushing. They had 3 guys over 400 that had some injuries, but, you know, it's a team that's kind of balanced. They moved a lot of guys in, but the big guy, and we're actually going to talk about him a lot moving forward, is Jamar Toombs, 255 pounds, finished with just 355 yards on the year, however, 14 touchdowns.
He seems like the red zone guy.
Yeah, but they like to do most of their damage through the air. Robert Ferguson led him 58 catches, 885 yards, 6 touchdowns offensively, averaged 381 yards per game, however, a negative 0.6 turnover margin. Offense ranked 49th in the country, averaged 27.9 points per game. Defensively, gave up 321 yards per game, 18 interceptions. They didn't force a fumble. How do you do that? 12 game. Well, let me rephrase that. They didn't recover a fumble during the regular season.
Right.
They forced them, but they didn't recover one fumble during the regular season.
I would actually want to see a stat that was, what did they force but not recover?
Yeah. 18 interceptions, though, is pretty good. And they finished, however, their defense, 26th in the country, gave up 19.1 points per game. Let's take a look at Mississippi State. Also in the year at 7-4 year. They were ranked 8 weeks during the regular season. It got as high as number 8 on the year. Finished 4-4 during those ranked times. Finished overall 24th in the country. Head coach, and this is where kind of the intrigue gets in, is Jackie Sherrill. 26 years as a head coach, spent it at 4 schools: Washington, Pitt, Mississippi State, and Texas A&M. He had a really good run there at Texas A&M. He spent 13 years there at Mississippi State. He finished 8-6 in bowl games. He had 10+ win seasons. Yeah. Three of which were added during his 5 years at Pitt. He had a really good team at Pitt. You think Tony Dorsett, Dan Marino, and they got as high as number 2, right there, kind of on that national championship picture. As a West Virginia guy and a West Virginia fan, I'm glad I wasn't alive because we didn't win any of those games back in the day. But he had a really good run there at Texas A&M. He had to resign in 1988 due to NCAA violations. A lot was made about that game because of him, but he said, you know, it wasn't about me because I wasn't throwing the ball, I wasn't making the tackles, I wasn't rushing. It was about a guy. So he tried to downplay it, but there was a lot going on there.
Both coaches readily admit that the main storyline coming into this game is Jackie Sherrill's first game coaching versus his old school. However, also admitted, and interestingly by Coach Sherrill, is that if he had to do the whole A&M situation over again, he would have handled it much differently.
I didn't have to leave, contrary to what people believe, and I left because of the loyalty, the compassion, a lot of things at that time that Texas A&M gave me. And no one's ever heard the truth. You know, you've only heard a third party, and you know, no one has the first party but myself. And you know, one of these days when I finish coaching, then I will, you know, tell that side in a book.
And that was still, I know he was trying to downplay it, but I know that he was wanting every which way to just completely go in there and just stomp A&M and just, you know, everything that happened over there. There was a purpose behind, you know, really wanting to win that game. But again, another coach that has had really good programs. And he talked about that Pitt program. Pitt, that was one of those teams where for the longest time you didn't really think about him. All of a sudden he shows up, and then here they are.
Yeah, and he also, thinking his defensive coordinator, Jimmy Johnson, won 2 Super Bowls and a bunch of national championships. He was his defensive coordinator. Now, there was kind of some reasons why Jimmy Johnson left to join him at Pitt. But, man, those Pitt teams were, for a Northeast team going against, you know, knowing what we know now. Because we think Pitt's a 7-4, 8-4 if you're lucky sort of team. And they were one of the best in the late 70s, early 80s.
Yeah, which is funny because you go and look at some of the, you know, who has the most national championships in the country, and all of a sudden, especially not like, I'm trying to remember the last time Pitt had one, but you had a stretch back in, I think, what was the 50s or something, and all of a sudden you see Pitt had like 8 national championships or something.
The Northeast kind of had some moments. You know, Penn State won a couple national championships in the 80s. You know, we forget in the 90s, Boston College was a perennial top 10 team. And my guys were going up against them in the Big East week in and week out. Actually, well, they scheduled them before then anyways. But it's kind of crazy how all the power shifted to the South. But when we were growing up, it was, you know, when we were growing up, it was kind of in the mid-center, you know, high school, college age, and went out towards the West, but now it's all kind of shifted.
It's all shifted to the South.
Down south, where the SEC. Offensively, Wayne Matkin, their quarterback, he threw for 1,908 yards, 8 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, only completed 56% of his passes. However, they got the job done on the ground. Running back DeCenso Miller, 996 yards, 10 touchdowns, also had 24 catches, 344 yards, a pair of touchdowns. They are kind of what Texas A&M was running the ball offensively. 5 wide receivers who had 200-plus yards, 4 of them with 2 touchdowns each. Offensively, averaged 386 yards per game and negative .8 turnover margin. averaged 21.4 points per game, the 29th best offense in the country. Defensively, 339 yards per game. They forced 19 turnovers, had 4 pick sixes, and they forced 3 fumbles and returned all 3 for touchdowns. So they had 7 defensive touchdowns.
Wow.
However, their defense was only ranked 37th in the country, gave up 18.7 points per game. A name to remember, future All-Pro, future Pro Bowlers Fred Smoot on that team. Pretty good player, had 5 interceptions on the year. So I got the football part of it out of the way. Taylor, okay, Shreveport, Louisiana. To give a little context, I have covered an Independence Bowl before. It was 85 degrees. And when I was at the Independence Bowl between Virginia Tech and Tulsa, Frank Beamer's final game, it wasn't 85 degrees on December 31st, 2000.
No, it was not. And just kind of from a broad weather perspective, it is once again your kind of classic winter setup for a winter storm down here in the South. So it wasn't anything that was necessarily a fluke. It wasn't like, oh, this pattern really doesn't produce snow and all of a sudden, holy cow, we're getting 10 inches of snow on the ground for some places. No, this was a nice, very strong trough. And we talk about the troughs and the ridges. Troughs is where you actually get your storm activity, whether it's severe weather or winter weather. So that's where you have that energy in the upper part of the atmosphere, and it just kind of swung down in the perfect spot, and you had this little area, low pressure that developed right along the kind of close to the Gulf Coast there. It wasn't necessarily overly strong, but all of a sudden you just started getting a huge dumping of snow on the ground. But the thing was the timing of when everything really moved in. And this is where I talked about at the beginning of the show where you get some of these games where snow is in the forecast. You might start off the game where it's like, oh, it's really nice outside. It's cold, but nothing going on. And all of a sudden, by halftime, you've got 5 inches of snow on the ground. That was the same thing with this game where you started off the game. And I even looked up and, just hearing some of the stories, seeing some of the comments from some of the National Weather Service officials, some people who were covering the game, and they were like, the timing was right as kickoff, it was fine, and then give it time, and all of a sudden it just started moving in, and they had to get like plows on the field and everything like that to just try to keep the game going. But from a weather perspective, it was your kind of classic winter situation that develops here in the South every now and then, and just happened to be in Shreveport, Louisiana that day, and it was definitely a game to remember.
Yeah, they had 36,000. Actually, I'll just say just a hair under 37,000. Most of them did not stick around because they were not ready for this whatsoever. It's the only snow game in Independence Bowl history. It's so weird because I remember my Independence Bowl. I remember driving from West Virginia, where I'm from. It was like 90s. In December, and driving all the way down, and I had and our game was the day after Christmas, so got to spend, no offense to Shreveport, Louisiana, but it's not exactly the greatest place you want to. I think most people there would admit it's not the greatest place you want to spend your Christmas. But I got to be there for Frank Beamer's final game. But let's get in the game, and it was right off the get-go. Taylor dominated by Texas A&M. First quarter, Richard Whitaker scores from 9 yards out to give Texas A&M a 7-0 lead.
Whitaker trying to get to the edge. Touchdown, Texas A&M. Richard Whitaker, the freshman, kicking in the turbo and finding pay dirt.
Soon after that, we spoke about that man, 255 pounds, Jamar Toombs. He punches it in for 4 yards out, and right now, Texas A&M in control at 14-0.
Goal from the Bulldog 4. Toombs, why not? Touchdown, Aggies.
So you think about it, Taylor. You've got your running game is working for Texas A&M. You're up 14-0 after the first quarter. You got to be feeling pretty good. Snow's coming down. It's a perfect run game kind of scenario, and A&M's got to be feeling pretty good at this point.
They definitely got to be feeling pretty good, especially if you're establishing that run game, and obviously when you have the elements that move through, whether it's snow or rain, even wind, usually that kind of limits the overall passing game. So if you get that run game established, you should be looking pretty at that point.
But in the second quarter, Bulldogs start eating. Dante Walker breaks off a 40-yard touchdown run that cuts the A&M lead in half to 14-7.
How he actually, big gaping hole for Walker, and he could go. Touchdown, Dante Walker.
Dante Walker takes it open. A 45-yard Mississippi.
Then how about the Bulldogs going to the air? Mackin's going to find Miller for a 5-yard score, and just like that, we're tied up at 14 apiece.
4 yards shy of the end zone. Complete to Miller. Touchdown, Bulldogs. A little screen on the pass. And they are 1 point away from tying this ball game up. Under a minute to play.
However, the Aggie pass game comes alive before the end of the half. Ferentz finds Robert Ferguson. Man, look at big plays, Taylor. A 42-yard touchdown. And this is going to kind of prove big later in the game. They missed the kick. So the Aggies take a halftime lead, 20-14.
First half, no mulligans on the kickoff. Ferris going up top. Touchdown, Ferguson.
So you look at it here, Taylor. We got some offense in the snow globe right now.
You got offense exploding in a game where you would think, oh my goodness, this is going to be a 10-9, very low scoring, defensive oriented game. But my goodness, the offense just exploding out there.
Yeah. All right, after halftime, we only have one score in the third quarter. It's going to be Mississippi State. Walker punches it in from a yard out. So now they get the extra point. It's now a 21-20 Bulldog lead.
Full house backfield. That time they got in. Walker.
But in the fourth quarter, it just gets nuts. This just starts getting crazy. Ferris is going to find Bethel Johnson another long touchdown. Taylor, 35-yard score. Aggies now lead at 28-21.
Ferris passing. Complete to Johnson. 1 man to beat. Touchdown Aggies.
Then the big fella goes eating again. It's Toombs. Muscles his way from 13 yards out. A&M now up 35-21.
Toombs. Touchdown, Toombs.
And Taylor, after that, you got to think, okay, fourth quarter, our big dogs are eating. You're up 2 touchdowns. You got to think this game's in hand.
You think it's in hand, but unfortunately you've seen how the game has kind of gone, and you can quickly get another offensive explosion. So 2 touchdown lead at that point, yeah, you might be feeling pretty good, but hold on. Yeah.
Here come the Bulldogs. Walker again breaks off another big run. 32 yards out, makes it 35-28.
We're an up-and-coming program. Gaping hole for Walker. Dante Walker touchdown.
Dante Walker takes it the distance.
And the Bulldogs are right back in it.
Later in the fourth, though, some big defense comes up here for the Bulldogs. Marco Minor is going to pick off Ferris, setting up the Bulldogs in a really, really good spot.
Bulldogs bring pressure. Picked off. It is intercepted by the Bulldogs. Number 23, Marco Minor, with a major play in the game.
Then later, Mackin's going to find Donald Lee for the 3-yard touchdown.
They go to the air. Touchdown. The tight end, Donald Lee, wide open.
It's 35 all. Taylor, just when you think it couldn't get any crazy, we're going into overtime.
Going to overtime, snow game, offensive explosions. I mean, it's gone from a game where you look at the forecast and, like I said, you think, oh, defensive performance, very low scoring game, and all of a sudden you got an instant offensive classic.
Yeah. Moving ahead now into overtime. Aggies get the ball first. They waste no time. The big fella, he's not done at the frozen buffet over at the Independence Bowl. Toombs goes in from 25 yards out.
Taylor in motion. Toombs. Toombs diving for the pylon. Touchdown on the first play.
However, this is where it gets as crazy as it can get. The extra point is blocked by the defensive player of the game, Willie Blade. Eugene Clinton picks it up, takes it all the way to the other side for a reverse conversion safety, however you want to put it. The Aggies are only up 4 now at 41-37.
And this one's blocked. And he laterals it. Into the end zone.
The Bulldogs don't take long after that. Mackin calls his own number for the 6-yard score, and Mississippi State is your 2000 Independence Bowl champions at 43-31.
The snap off, and they barely get it off. Madkin. Touchdown! The Bulldogs win it!
And Taylor, did you think of all the things that could happen in a snow game? You have an extra point blocked, taking it the other way, and then you get a slow quarterback scoring the game-winning touchdown in overtime.
You just, again, it's just end up one of those just absolutely classic games, not only on the weather side, but just from a football standpoint as well. Just crazy things happening. Like you said, you got a very slow quarterback just somehow making a rushing touchdown, just reached it over. And, I mean, you go back and you mentioned, hey, there was an extra point that was blocked earlier in the game. And a game like that, that could be a game-changing event, and it was.
Yeah, they had to eventually get a 2-point conversion. You know, it's little things like that. It was kind of a precursor to what was going to happen in overtime.
Yeah.
Look at the stats. The big fella Toombs, you know, like we said, he only came into the game with 355 yards. He had 193 yards on 35 carries. I think he had just under 50 carries in the season.
Yeah.
He had 35 carries in this game, 3 scores. Mississippi State, though, led the rushing game. They had 246 yards as a team. The Aggies had 209. Fumble-wise, you would think, snow game, bad weather, it's going to happen. Mississippi State had 4, only lost 1. So that was the lone A&M recovery as far as fumbles go. And then A&M had 1 fumble, lost that during the game. So you would think, just some little stats here, it's the second highest scoring Independence Bowl in their history. The other one happened to be one I was at in 2015. Virginia Tech and Tulsa lit it up there. Hokies and Beamer's final game won at 55-52. That was ACC versus the Americans. So, Taylor, you would think, okay, well, we've got this big momentum. Mississippi State finishes 8-4 in the top 25. They're just going to ride that momentum into the next couple of years, right?
Unfortunately not.
Very wrong.
Yeah.
Here's how the next 3 years go. 3-8, 3-9. 2-10, and Cheryl has to hang it up over at Mississippi State. So that's how his illustrious career ends.
Yep. And I believe, do I know who took over for him? I believe. Was that Sylvester Croom? Was that someone else?
Ooh, that might.
I think it was Croom that took over for him.
I think you're right. Ooh, we're going to do some.
We're going to do some research real quick.
Let's see. Let's see. Hang on, ladies and gentlemen. I want to say Croom was later because I was at one.
He might have been later.
I was at one of his games. They came to West Virginia and unfortunately ran into Pat White at the wrong time.
Yeah, really.
It was Sylvester Croom. That
That's
was
what
his
I
first
thought.
year.
Yep.
Wow, look at this guy coming out of nowhere with that one.
I am a huge Sylvester Croom fan.
Yeah.
I know that he didn't have the longest tenure over there at Mississippi State, but he had some really good teams.
Yeah.
And the thing, I'm a huge Alabama fan,
Yeah.
but that game that he went into Tuscaloosa and they ended up beating the Crimson Tide,
It's huge.
that was huge for them. And obviously being a product of Paul Bear Bryant, one of his teams, I'm a huge Croom fan, and he is just a fantastic coach and fantastic person. I really thought that was who took over for him afterwards.
That was a good thought right there. There's some controversy because they hired Mike Schuler over him.
Yep.
And he had been a long-time assistant there as well. So
Yep.
I've watched that SEC story about Sylvester. I know some of the background about that.
Yep.
A&M, not much better. Finished 8-4 in the next year, 6-6 next. R.C. Slocum is done after that over in A&M, and outside of a couple Johnny Manziel years and maybe a couple Jimbo years,
Yep.
there hasn't really been much to speak. They've had Dennis Franchione, Mike Sherman, former NFL guys, and not Franchione, but Mike Sherman. So just not much success over there whatsoever.
You speak of Franchione, I just immediately go to the game where they were playing Oklahoma, and it was 77-0.
Yes.
I believe was the final score in that one.
I do believe that was his last year.
That was his last year.
Wow.
Yep.
Crazy. Well, Taylor, the big question we're going to ask at the end of every Game of Storms episode, did weather play a factor in this game?
You know what? You would think that it definitely would, but I really don't think it did too much, because you look at the offensive explosion that happens in the game. Like I mentioned, you look at some of the big weather games, especially with snow, most of the time you don't really think that it's going to be offensive explosions. And then all of a sudden you just had a huge offensive game. So I would kind of lean more towards maybe it didn't have much of an impact. If there was supposed to be a specific time where I said, hey, maybe the weather did have an impact on that, I would say some of the missed extra points and potentially some of the fumbles that tried to recover. But as a whole, I mean, I don't really think that it didn't seem like it had much of an impact on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if anything, it kind of started this era, and you see it more in the NFL than what college, where weather doesn't matter. I mean, I've covered a couple crazy snow games. I've been high scoring. Just because back in the day, I would say pre-2000, you see snow, okay, they'd be lucky to get double figures. Now, you definitely say that for rain. Snow, not so much. I think this game was starting to kind of shift that in the right direction. Like, hey, you don't have to completely condense your offense because you have snow on the ground.
Exactly. As long as you're able to adapt to it, and like you mentioned, it does seem like we're kind of going into the realm where it doesn't really matter a whole lot unless it's just so much of a factor you can't get out of it. But I mean, that's what it's like. You go in expecting low scoring game, hard fought on defense, and all of a sudden you get both teams in the 40s and going into overtime.
Well, Taylor, that's our first episode of Game of Storms. We had a lot of fun to talk about. Looking forward to our next episode.
Sounds good. Let's keep it going.
For Taylor Plott, I'm AJ Gibb. We'll see you guys next week.
This is the X Sports Network.